And I think let's go ahead and get the party started.
Great. I'm going to share my screen. Give me one moment, please. Thank you all for
Sure.
being here today or watching
Yeah,
it
no.
later.
Well,
However you
Kelsey
want
gets her
to.
screen set up. I'm Ron Zwicky of the David James Group. Thank you for signing up for this webinar, The Power of Live in-Person Podcasting at your next event. Kelsey and Larry did this webinar at the session, I should say, at the ASAE annual meeting. It was phenomenal and well received. You guys are in for a treat today. Um, I encourage everyone to submit questions. Just click on the little question button and you can submit a question in writing and we'll ask those at the end. And at this point, I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to turn it over to Larry and Kelsey.
Great. Welcome, everyone. We're going to jump right in. I'm Larry Guthrie. I'm the Director of Content Strategy at the Society of Women Engineers.
And I'm Kelsey Reed. I'm the Manager of Digital Content and Media here at the David James Group. So before we really get going, we have a couple quick poll questions for you. I don't know if Ron, if the poll is like an official thing. Aha, there we go.
Yes. We're going to take a minute to vote on those.
And if you're watching this later and maybe you can't see the poll, I'm not sure how it works. Question 1 is, do you have a podcast? Question 2 is, have you held live on-site podcast recordings? And then question 3 is, who wants to increase their podcast listenership?
Had to have a rhetorical in there.
Yeah.
See the answers coming in to give you guys a few more moments. If you can take a moment to fill that out, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
All right.
So what you'll see is as the questions are about to come up, the answers rather, you can see on our screen right now just a kind of quick summary of what we did. And we're going to take you through everything that went into this, from strategy to tactical execution.
Yes. Ron, do we have the responses?
We've received what we're going to receive. So 100% of those answered. No, they do not have a podcast. 100%. Let's see, we've got one person. Have you held live on-site podcast recordings? A no and a not applicable. And then who wants to increase their listenership? Let's see, one says we do, and one says we're good where we're at. So that is the poll.
Which is amazing if you don't have a podcast to begin with. That's
Yeah. Not much to increase.
Good point, Larry.
All right. Well, very cool. That we love having like a wide range of folks who some people have it, some people don't, some people want to start one, some people want to take it to the next level and do something very, very cool like we did. So let's keep moving along. So I'm going to give a little quick background on our podcast itself and the background before we get into the on-site experience. So this is Diverse, a Society of Women Engineers podcast. It actually started back in 2015. So we have had this podcast for a very long time, various levels of engagement and growth over the years. On the podcast, we tell stories of women and allies in STEM, anything from their career journeys to new technologies to professional advice, how to overcome imposter syndrome, things like that. At this point, under Larry and myself's leadership, we release one episode every week, sometimes two, and we have two sponsor slots a month where sponsors can pay and have a piece of content on our podcast. So those are very popular as well. So the context of this presentation, we have this podcast that exists and it's beloved, but we want to grow it. It's not at the numbers that we really, really would love it to be. As far as listeners. So we have that on one hand. And in October 2023, we had the We23 conference. This is the Society of Women Engineers annual conference. It's enormous. There's nearly 19,000 individuals who come together in person, not even counting the virtual aspect. So picture these two things colliding. Like, how can we get this podcast in front of these individuals who traveled here and are engaged and want to be here. So that's the background. You can scan that QR code to check out Diverse on your own time. I'm going to hand it off to Larry to talk about our strategy and goals for the onsite podcast.
Yeah, thanks. So, if you're going to put this kind of effort and actually what you'll find out is a modest amount of budget into this, which is completely able to be monetized. You really want to have a strategy behind what you're looking to achieve with that and some measurable goals, right? So you can show how well it did and did it really get to where you wanted to on that one. For us, we had three. It was a three-pronged approach. Of course, the obvious is content strategy. When you have everyone at this conference, why not take advantage? All the speakers, the attendees, the sponsors, and capture that diverse array of stories. It's in our name. It's what we really thrive on as far as the source of our narratives. And this is such an incredible, efficient way to capture a ton of those stories. And it's fun. And what I also love is there's some magic that happens. Certainly we do Zoom all the time throughout the year. And I'm always excited when we can do face-to-face podcasts because there's just that connection that you just can't get any other way that just makes them a little extra special. And so what we did is we actually recorded 12 over 3 days and then meted them out over the next 5 months or so. So you're really building this really robust content library. And it's an incredible investment of time and resources. Second, of course, this is at an event, right? So event activation, everyone's always looking, what's the kind of something new this year? What can we give? Or in this case, with us, you'll hear how we build it even for next year, this year. So how do we create that exciting experience for the attendees that kind of rolls up into the association's overarching goals? Like for us, podcast branding and awareness, so this booth, it was perfect to engage all the guests, all the attendees. They got to watch an episode being recorded in real time. Of course, we don't broadcast them live, but at least they get to see it live, which is equally as exciting. And then even between recordings, what also worked at this event activation, we were kind of the informal info desk because she'll talk a little bit more about where placement, location, location, location. And this was really true for our on-site podcast studio. But so many people would stop by. They would be asking about anything, but they would also ask about the podcast and they would scan the QR code. So it was really helping drive some of the goals that we're looking for. It was kind of the gift that kept on giving over the 3 days. For sponsor relations, that's our last piece because, we're talking about money, right? And the sponsor dollars is what often funds these types of events. And it's having this kind of thought leadership opportunity for them is a great way to engage them or acknowledge them. You can have it, for the whole booth. This was it's first year we did it, second year that the association had done it. But this year, and we have a nice little surprise at the end, but this whole activation can be sponsored. And outside of that, it's a great way for those sponsors that are there that just didn't get a chance to speak at any of the sessions, or maybe to make good or, a kind of a value add. Once they're on, what's amazing is that this year we found that we had actually a sponsor that wanted to do a regular sponsored episode, but it was aligning perfectly. Everybody's going to be at our We24 conference in October. And we got a little FOMO from last year. They mentioned that they said, we want to be, can we do it at the podcast studio? We thought that was really cool. So it really had an added benefit that I don't know if we were necessarily expecting. We were kind of hoping for maybe, but we see that already as far as how it affects sponsors and the value of them coming to a conference. So just be thinking, when you're thinking about what you can do at your association, what other goals do you see your association reaching with something like this?
Yeah, I really love what Larry said too, like just getting people together in person. But like you saw on a previous slide, you can see on this slide, that's our CEO and executive director posing for a picture with one of our speakers. Like after every episode, people felt really tight and we took pictures and they shared it on social. And there is just that absolute level of connection that we just don't quite get throughout the year. Although our podcasts throughout the year are great too, but it was just really special. Let's talk a little bit about the booth itself. The point was to catch the eye quickly, and I would say we achieved that, thanks to our design team, and this is just our podcast branding as a whole. So you can see here from the visual design side, we really wanted bold graphics and simple messaging. There's no blocks of text. There's no paragraphs about what this thing's about. It's a podcast, it's bright, it's colorful, you get the picture, and there's a QR code. And it was really cool, as Larry mentioned, we'd be sitting in there recording an episode, and you'd see people like wandering by, like clicking the QR code with their phones, you know, so, and we did see that reflection in the web traffic for the landing page as well. And you can see the booth design itself. We did not create this from scratch. We did not architect this. Our conference vendors have podcast booth options, and this is the one we chose. So that's something to keep in mind as far as like an actionable step. If you were going to do this at your own conference, speak to your vendor who has all these structures and items and see what's possible. You'll see at the top is an open fishbowl top. They all come like that I've ever seen. And we've gotten a lot of questions like, well, how do you make sure it's not too noisy? And that's all about what Larry said, location, location, location. So you want to, first of all, we're going to talk about microphones in a few minutes, but generally speaking, the recording equipment on site you're going to have is pretty good. So you don't really have to worry that much about being drowned out. That being said, we recommend you don't plop your booth in the middle of the most crowded area, right? I think in the past, we had, not him and I, but the organization had put it maybe in the middle of like a crowded career fair. It just didn't have the same situation. It was just too loud with background noise. So we purposely picked our spot, which was near registration without being right in the middle of it. So you could see the booth from registration. It's really obvious. People come up and see what's going on with it. But we weren't right in the thick of everyone trying to figure out their badges. So this was great. We also, I would really recommend, we liked having some background noise. The whole point of this, and I mean, part of those 3 goals was that it was live and special and cool. So we wanted people to hear in the episode later that we were live. So I would just say, don't be afraid of a little background noise. Inside the booth itself, you know, we wanted it to feel like this welcome, safe space. People on our podcast share their personal stories, and we want them to feel relaxed and comfortable doing so. So we did have water available for everyone. We did have the chairs. You can kind of tell in the upper left, Larry and I were off to the side, and we did structure the chairs in a way that folks could just talk to each other, it could feel conversational. We had an, you can kind of see it, we had an on-air sign that we would light up when we were actually recording. Lesson learned for this year, we need to order a bigger, brighter one, but it was pretty cool. You know, you'd go turn it on and that's when you close the door and it's time. And then you can see at the bottom here, we had some swag and merchandise for our podcast that we were giving out in the booth. We're actually amplifying that a lot this year, and we'll have a lot more items, but that was one more thing we had there. So this is on site. And what I really want to share, I think a big theme that Larry and I are both going to share is that once we got there, it was fun and dynamic and engaging, and everyone was happy and loved it. That was only possible because of the immense amount of planning and work that we did on the back end before you get there, so that you're organized, you're good to go, and you can get there and enjoy it. So I'm going to speak about that for a moment. Okay, so as Larry mentioned, we recorded 12 episodes. All of those episodes had at least one host, 1 to 2 guests per episode. So we're talking about quite a few folks who were wrangling their schedules to all be there on time in person at a very busy conference where they have a lot going on. So that's a challenge. Our solutions to the challenge was we used Calendly. I think a lot of folks are familiar with Calendly as, you know, you see a link that says schedule appointment with me on Calendly. You know, we used it a little bit differently, but the way we used it did really work for us. It ensured we had 0 no-shows. Everyone arrived on time. What was unique was that only Larry and I had access to the Calendly itself, the back end. So there was no such thing as like we were not sending out links to people and having them pick their times. That would have been chaos. So in my opinion, so we did individually schedule one-on-one with all these 12 episodes. And once we agreed on a time, him and I went into Calendly and made a little block for it and plugged the individuals in ourselves. So no one was able to make changes unless we were the ones making them. Calendly is nice because they'll get a email and they can add it to their own calendar. A very important thing that we did was that we required text reminders. So when we asked people to sign up, we did express that, we do collect mobile numbers for this sole purpose. And you can see our exact screenshot of what text reminders we sent people right there. So it was 15 minutes before and 2 hours before our speakers and hosts got a reminder to please come meet us. So we figured that on-site people are busy and you're not always checking calendars. So the text really did help. We allowed for 30 minutes between each recording in case there were any late arrivals and things like that. So that was just one of our tips. And I do want to give a caveat that sometimes your expectations as the people running this don't match with the guests' schedules and the reality. So for example, the conference is 3 days. We wanted to record 12 episodes. So we were thinking 4 episodes a day. Perfect. Well, it turned out that the guests we wanted and were trying to get on the show, a lot of them were actually like traveling out that last day. And so we ended up having to front load a lot of our episodes more than we had planned. So one day we did 6 episodes, and then the next day we did 4, and one day we did 2. So I just want to put that out there that you can be very organized, and we recommend you are, but you also need to be a little bit flexible. And if there's one longer day for your team, in the end, it'll even out. Okay, so that's what we did on the back end with the scheduling. I'd like to hand it off to Larry to talk a little bit about the equipment we used.
Yeah, so what we're kind of going through now is we've talked about the strategy and goals, and we're kind of laying the foundation, right? Before we get into, how are we choosing our speakers and coming up with our questions and those types of things. So, and it really is based on laying that foundation in place to where when you're actually doing the rest of the process, it does allow for that flexibility. It does allow to, allow for that background noise. So you have that. And the recording equipment is really key, especially when it comes to background noise and just quality of the end product. Ours, what the big headline is, it is surprisingly simple to use and incredibly cost effective. All the equipment that we used, less than $500, so not too bad. And of course, the booth itself as well. The booth, I think if we add the booth and the equipment, I think we're on just under 6K if I'm not mistaken. So it is a bit of an investment with the booth and everything in the design. The equipment itself, not so bad. And what's great about it, you get really high quality. It is travel friendly. It is super user friendly. And proof of this, we had, and it allows for 4 different guests. So you can see there's 4 different tracks that you can use. And isolating those tracks allows you to manipulate whatever you need in post. So if one mic's picking up too much background noise or whatever it is, they're able to go in and make those adjustments on everybody's individual tracks. Very key on that one. We got some quality mics and pop filters to reduce any kind of extra noise, those types of other extra voice kind of modulations that happen. And then, of course, laptop and miscellaneous cables. That's really the whole setup. You can see this all fits in a very small box. You could travel with this very easily. So it's great for here, but we also have what we call We Local. They're smaller conferences throughout the globe. And what we are able to do with this, we can easily ship this off. And since it's user friendly, we don't necessarily have to be there. In fact, the last day, Kelsey was able to, Ron had to take over, and I think maybe 10 minutes it took you to
Yes,
get up to speed on this?
Our trusty webinar host, Ron, filled in for me on the last day, and it took maybe 10 minutes to show him how to use it, and it all went fine. So we really recommend this type of setup for associations.
Yeah, and we just use the laptop from the conference. And what's great about that is we do all the setup once, right? It's a lockable thing on the booth itself. And so we just had to set up everything once, lock it up, leave it, come back in, pop it open, and it was ready to go. Next up, we're talking about, we've got everything ready. And now, okay, who are we going to pick? Hosts, speakers. We're going to go in through our scripting and questions. Speaker identification strategy. Guess what our key piece is based on the name of our podcast? It's diversity. That's what we're looking for. And it could be anyone from existing speakers at the conference, kind of a take on their session or an expansion of something that they spoke on. We also, very key, we added a clause in all speaker contracts that we could exercise for a podcast. Obviously we didn't do it for everyone, but it was nice to already have that in there to where we didn't have to go back and renegotiate with any speaker. It was already in there as part of an expectation that if we exercised it, that they would be available. Of course, barring any crazy scheduling issues. And then we also had just some organic stuff, stories just kind of trickle through. We found through our executive team that there were a couple Apple students that had gone through Apple's high school program. And that actually ended up, as we'll talk to you a little later, actually ended up being our highest listened to podcast of last year. So I love it's, again, being flexible, putting those feelers out. You're planning. We always leave a couple extras just for that. And we also leave some for sponsors. So we give our sponsorship team a couple so that they can use it for those value adds. Host identification strategy. We have a professional host that we use for most of them. We did not fly her out to this. So we relied on staff, volunteer leaders, those types of things. So your president, your executive director, certainly myself can jump in, the editor of your magazine, your senior editor, those types of things. It's also really great for your president-elects. They have to come to this, but it's not their year. And they're notorious for saying, okay, I'm in here in this capacity. Can I have something to do, right? And this is really wonderful. And I love from content strategy, it's a great way to get their feet wet, because you never know every single year what level of comfort they are with speaking, media training. It's a great way to get that process started, create those kind of create the relationships early on for myself so that we can kind of get them going. So by the time their term hits next summer for us, fiscal year, they are already well on their way and they're hitting the ground running, if you will, at the official term. Next up, Kelsey's going to talk about script protocols.
All right. So we've scheduled our speakers, we've identified our speakers, and aligning with those goals that Larry talked about with sponsor relations and all that. Now onto the actual content and meat of the episodes we're recording. We prepared all questions well in advance for all of these episodes. That is something we do standard on our podcast across the board year round. So it just made sense to do it this time as well. This, we have found in our experience, helps people be prepared and know what we're going to talk about. And it also provides another touch point for us to speak with them. 1 week before the conference, everyone had already received their questions by then, but everyone got another email from us saying, all right, here is your time slot. Here is the link to your script. Here is my cell phone number. This is everything you need in one place. We focused on evergreen content. So this is different associations do this differently when recording live. We did not make any episodes about the conference itself necessarily because we did not publish these right away. We did not publish these episodes during the conference. We did not publish them right after the conference. We dripped them out over about 3 to 6 months. So as I mentioned, we have a weekly podcast. And so we consider this a time to get a lot of great content and then fill in our weeks with it. So because of that, we wanted what they were talking about to be relevant year round, whether you heard it 5 years from now or at, right when it was published. The only exception to that is that in every introductory of the script, in every introduction, we mentioned that we were recording live from the We23 podcast studio. So that's not exactly evergreen technically, but it generates excitement and awareness around the fact that we had this podcast studio at all. What we wanted to do was plant the seed over 6 months of, oh yeah, they record podcasts at that conference. Oh, I wonder if they're going to do that again. Oh yeah, that was pretty cool. You know, just to kind of subconsciously remind people that this is something we do. And it, as Larry did mention earlier, it worked out because we did have a situation this year where a sponsor said, could we record one in the booth this time? So we also had a generic set of questions ready in the event that someone, you know, that we found someone that we wanted to do a spur of the moment episode with. A lot of our episodes follow a similar like kind of story trajectory, not all, but many. So we were able to come up with some generic questions just in case. You know, what if your board president comes in and says, we have to interview this person, right? You want to be ready for those moments. We did not end up doing any spontaneous episodes this year. We were pretty jam-packed with our scheduled ones, but we were ready for it, and we're going to be ready for it again this year. And just being flexible in general, we've already kind of touched on that. I won't belabor the point. But Larry can talk to you for a moment about a new style of the podcast that we piloted during this
Yeah, so the flexible piece was, you know, we have our format, we know we're going through, and then sometimes you are presented with an opportunity that it's okay. This, in this case, we had two sponsors for value add. The stories, we were able to figure out what that story looked like and that through line for both of them to include them on one episode. What we chose to do is create a brand new sub-series in our podcast called A View from the Top and try something new, right? And what was new about it, certainly we could have sat them in a room, both of them with one moderator, and did it that way. We knew that the goal of this was sponsor value add. So what we did is we actually interviewed them separately and created that VIP experience for them. And then in post, blended the interviews together to make one. And it was a great way to really, because you never know, right? You know, it's they could be, they're not competitors. They would never do that to us, thankfully. But it's, you know, you want them to feel it's not just the podcast, it's about the podcast experience itself. And so we were able to kind of create something new and it went really well. So we know we've got another tool in our back pocket if we want to continue with that sub series going forward. And you know, when we're talking about evergreen content, we just chose to do it that way. But you know, if you're able to turn around a podcast episode that quickly, that's about the event going on, I mean, why not? We just we knew we were trying. This was our first year, so we wanted to put enough on our plate,
Yeah.
and then we know that maybe in subsequent years, maybe we will add. We just keep adding something new every year on this one. You'll hear about more about next year on that. Um, and then how did we do? So we did all this work, laid the ground rules, the foundation, executed everything, zero no shows, fantastic experiences. Kelsey.
All right. So yeah, I mean, you do all this work. Obviously, like there is a benefit to sponsors being happy and everyone being happy, but we're marketers, right? And so we wanted to know, did this work? Did anyone, you know, listen? So here we have, this is 1 year of our podcast listener data. And you can see, right, at the end of October, there's this massive spike. Well, I'm happy to report that the end of October is when this whole podcast booth happened. So we knew that people were clicking the QR code, right? But that just goes to the website. That doesn't really indicate whether or not someone was listening. And so what we know from this listener data is that people were listening. And this is just like really exciting and cool. And we really hope to replicate this next year as well. And then Larry could talk a little more about how our other results lined up with our strategy.
Yeah, it's the callback, right? We talked about what our strategies and goals were for this project. So how did we do on content strategy? You know, we recorded those 12 interviews for 11 episodes in just over 3 days that we dripped out over the 3 to 6 months. And that kind of allowed us this kind of plug and play whenever we wanted to from this wonderful content library. Um, the event activation, as you can see, traffic skyrocketed during the conference. They were stopping by. Goodness knows all the swag was gone. We had some measurable results around the event activation, and we're so excited that we're definitely doing it this year. Sponsor relations, the sponsors were glowing. High level of satisfaction, engaged guests, and just onsite in general. It's worth saying that that onsite piece, that face to face, we had some really wonderful engaged guests who went on to promote their episodes. Same with the sponsors. And as a result, remember those Apple students? Well, this year, Apple was so excited about their last year's experience that they are now our official sponsor for this year's. And the sponsorship package on that, it pretty much pays for our investment. So just to let you know, you can get one sponsorship like this, and it pretty much pays for about 4 years of this sponsor of this site podcast booth. So it's not with the right sponsors and the right experience and the right execution. In just 1 year, we were able to kind of turn around and monetize it fully.
Yeah.
So what can you do to get started? And what's next steps for everyone here as we're wrapping up?
Yes. All right. We're gonna we wanted this to be actionable, right? Like it's all nice and good to talk about how happy our sponsors are and how we got this huge sponsorship for next year. But like for anyone listening who wants to try this for the first time, what is the actual action steps to take? Um, oh, okay. So action step number one is to speak to your conference vendor about their podcast booth options. So, as mentioned, we didn't create that initial design for the booth. So talk to them, find out how much it costs. That's the first step. That's the first step, period.
Yep. And then buy-in is really important. It looks like our don't mind what you see on the
The
screen.
slide's a little off, but
Yes,
we've
just
got
look.
it. Just listen to us.
Yes. So the other piece is getting buy-in. If you're looking to have this type of investment, it's again not too bad in the overall scheme of what a conference costs, and it's enough to where people are going to expect to see how things go and was it worth the investment. And getting buy-in from your senior management is critical. We were able to secure that very easily. And what was also great is because of that buy-in, that's exactly how we got our Apple's story as well. So never underestimate the power and the reach of having that buy-in for that.
Yeah. Step three is to set up your scheduling tool, whether you use Calendly like us, or I've been part of a different one where we just send out Outlook invites and put on people's calendars. You can do whatever you want, but whatever you're going to do, set that up before you need it. That's our piece of advice there, because once you start emailing people and grappling with schedules and time zones and their teams and assistants, like you want that in place to quickly slot them in. So that would be step three, figure out how you're going to schedule these people.
And if you could take the rest as well.
Yeah, sure. Step four is to start identifying your topics and speakers. So you've got your scheduling tool, and follow what Larry said a few slides ago and go find your speakers and topics that you want engaging. In some cases, your corporate relations team and your leadership. And our final point is to purchase your recording equipment. Again, this is something that you don't need to overthink. We got ours on Amazon for less than $500, and there's no real way to like mess it up. If you have something that's functional and working, you're gonna be okay. It doesn't have to be perfect.
So here we are at the end of everything, leaving room for some questions, and then we'll also have our information up there. You can always scan our QR codes and connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd love to talk to you more in case you have other specific questions, or even if you leave here and you have some questions from now until you decide to get started on this project. Feel free to connect with us. We'd love to hear from you. And I guess wanted to open that up. Ron, if we have any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. Thank you, Kelsey, for a great session here and webinar. Couple questions we do have. And again, if you still would like to submit one, please do so by clicking on that Q&A button. Question, was there anything that surprised you when recording the podcast live versus remotely?
Oh, you know, I would I would say that, yeah, I don't know if I was necessarily surprised by the actual recording itself. I mean, we knew that the live face-to-face was going to be pretty wonderful. Um, I think it was just we underestimated the attention and with the rest of the attendees that were there at the event. That was the big surprise for me. I was um, pleasantly surprised that we received as much attention as we did.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, agreed. I think a lot of, we already kind of touched on how it was like people kind of made friends with each other while speaking on the same episode. In general, if you're running a podcast and you're not using like professional speakers, oftentimes people get a little bit nervous. Not always, but sometimes. So that happens on Zoom or in person. I did think that was a little bit less in person because you could just all be there and be grounded and just chill and close the door. Um, but I think what Larry mentioned, like having people wander in and be like, where's the charging stations? It wasn't as much about the recording itself, but we got to talk to a lot of people. And those opportunities, let me add, are opportunities to talk to them about the podcast. Like,
That's great.
did you know we have a podcast? Like, oh, cool. Have you ever listened? Oh, cool. Some people had never listened to the podcast before. So it was a great opportunity, even if they're just looking for the bathroom or something, to say, like, hey, we're here, check us out when you get home. So I wasn't too surprised by any of it, but I was really happy it worked out.
Yeah, and a lesson that we learned from that, and Kelsey had alluded to it, that we are bumping up our swag for this year. It went so quickly, and it was an opportunity, if you're talking with somebody, to give them something to go away with. So we are doing a variety of different swag this year, and we're even doing some that are kind of more premium, where we're going to ask people to subscribe, take a picture, selfie in front of the podcast booth to kind of get some more engagement. So we're really knowing that that was a little surprising how many people came through. We're taking those lessons and changing, improving some of the tactics that we're using this year to kind of make the most of that pleasant surprise that we got last year.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for answering that. Each of you, what would you say is the biggest challenge for a first timer doing this?
It's, I would say it's the research. If you're not too familiar, I mean, it's one thing to do a podcast remotely, it's another to do a full studio and everything that goes into that, with everything that we covered in here. That's really the impetus of why we decided to do this session for ASAE and do it here, is that we realized all the stuff we've covered. It was figuring out all those details and finding the right solution for all of them, to make sure that when it was day of and we were going through the process, having people come in, the recording, making sure they're comfortable, the event activation, like all those things that we talked about, that to me that took probably the most time and the most thought process on my end, was just going through everything and finding the right solution. What did you think, Kelsey?
Yeah, this was the first. SWE has done a podcast before, but not in this level of booth, not to the point. Larry and I both started in these roles around the same time last year. So we both went through this for the first time together and created this from scratch, really. We didn't have a lot to go off of. I think I was really worried about the equipment going into it. I do not consider myself a techie person, and I think that's why I'm extra focused on telling anyone listening, don't overthink it, because I was overthinking it. And realistically, when you get it, you learn it. It's really it's very user friendly. All those types of on-site recorder, any recorder that looks like the one that we shared is about essentially the same user experience. If you contact us, we can send you the exact one we used if you really want. But I think that was my challenge, was I was really worried about things going wrong with the recording itself. I wasn't that worried about the scripts. We write those all the time. I wasn't that worried about the speakers. That's what I was worried about. But I think the solution to that is to just go into it and be prepared. And also, some of it's a little bit of a mindset shift. We all want it to go well. We want the sponsors to be happy. We want it to be perfect. And if it didn't go perfectly on one recording, if there was a little botched audio thing, could you still be okay? Could you fix that? And the answer is yeah. So I would just I would say that was the biggest challenge for me.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelsey. I think we have time for a couple more questions. How did you guys ensure that the episodes recorded live remained relevant to listeners after the event? I think you talked a little bit about this earlier, but maybe some more on that.
Ron, can you repeat that one again?
Yeah, how did you ensure the episodes recorded live remained relevant to listeners after the event?
Yeah, so we use an evergreen strategy all the time on Diverse. So most of our episodes, like we'll have special episodes for certain months of the year, Hispanic Heritage Month, things like that. But even then, when you listen to the content of the episode, you can listen to it 3 years later on the opposite time of year and still get something out of it. So that's something that we've built over time and that our listeners have come to expect. So for us, we asked them questions that are kind of timeless, and got them to share their stories. And we didn't focus, even when we had, let's say someone spoke at the conference about something. When she came on our show, we did not just say like, so what did you talk about in your session? So what did you cover? What did people ask you? We didn't really focus on the session. We focused on the topic at hand. So that can all be handled when you're writing the script itself. And I think that did help as we dripped it over time. We didn't really have to worry about people's positions shifting or things like that. We could just let it go.
Cool.
Agreed. Yeah, I think you said it all.
All right. One final question before I ask it. For our attendees, again, thank you for attending. We will be providing a link to this webinar recording after today. So just look for that in your email. Last question. How did you promote the on-site podcast studio to conference attendees, if you did?
That's a good question. So I can start, Larry, if you have more, or if you have more to add. Our focus, this is our first time doing this. So our focus was to do it well and to make our speakers happy and our sponsors happy and the SWE community happy and get that visibility. So we did not actively try to promote it to the conference attendees, at least in my view, other than making sure that it was very visibly cool and obvious. And I think that even worked. I mean, people walked by, took pictures of it was like being in at like, paparazzi, right? People take pictures as we were recording episodes. This year we could stand to do a little more of that. As Larry mentioned, we don't people have asked us in the past, do we like broadcast it out, like the sound while we're recording so people can listen? And the answer is no. Our speakers really like the freedom to make a mistake or pause. We edit things out if they want, so they can always start over on answers. So I would say the biggest thing we did was after the fact was what we shared about putting it in other podcast episodes and telling them that we record it live. I will say this year, our next week conference is coming up. I have been putting it in some of our podcast scripts that we've already published, like come visit stop by the booth at We24, come pick up some swag. So, but we don't like actively encourage folks to stop by. They just kind of organically did. Larry, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add.
I agree. I think last year was a more our training ground, if you will. We just wanted to do it well and do it right. They did, like had mentioned, they did do the podcast booth the year before we had started. Both of us had started at our respective positions, and they really wanted last year to go beautifully, and that's really what our focus was on. This year, we're in great space. Here's the good thing: we've done all the work now. We get to enjoy the fruits of that. So this year, it was so much easier because we had everything. We had the equipment, we had scheduling, we knew how we wanted the design to go. Like it was all that stuff that we did. It's kind of a one and done kind of piece. Obviously, you update your graphics every year and maybe learn and adapt and make things even better. But the most of the work was already done. So this year we're enjoying all of that and we are promoting it more. It's going to be promoted in signage. It's going to be promoted in a lot of different ways, saying, really making it more of an event activation for even more so. So it's not something we're being more proactive to push, really drive a lot of traffic. And we've got the swag to to back it up to kind of give them an incentive to pop by, if watching a live one isn't incentive enough. So we're really excited to see what that happens this year.
Yeah, we've even had a couple, like I've had quite a few people who speak on the podcast throughout the year who are coming to the conference because this is like the premier SWE event of the year. So we've had a couple of reach outs of people saying, "Hey, are you going to be at the conference?" And the answer is yes. But Larry and I are essentially in the podcast booth the whole time. So it's a great opportunity to say, "Hey, have you spoken on the podcast before?" Yeah, come by. If we're not actively recording an episode, remember I mentioned we do leave some breathing room between episodes. We're around, like we will and this year we're going to have way more swag, so we'll hand it out. We're here to talk. So I am curious to see how that goes, and I think we're going to keep pushing ourselves year after year. This year we have a sponsor, so we want to make sure that that they have a good, like a full sponsor, make sure they have a good experience. And yeah, we'll keep pushing ourselves. Who knows, maybe someday we will release a quick release one, or we'll do something. But I think every year we want to make it better and better.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, Larry. And thank you again to everyone who's attended today. Look forward to or look for a forthcoming email, as I said, with a link to this recording. And we are hosting these things. So look to other emails in the future for future episodes. Thanks for your time today. Larry and Kelsey, good luck at We24 in a few weeks here. And have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.